Have you ever stopped to think that maybe it's not a lack of opportunities, money, or talent that's preventing your success, but silent habits? What do you practice every day without realizing it? What if what seems normal, acceptable, or even spiritual is actually acting as an invisible block to the growth you so desire? This question is uncomfortable, but extremely necessary because the Bible reveals that true success begins long before the results appear, is born in daily choices, in mindset, and in the alignment of the heart. In this video, you won't hear quick fixes or empty promises. Here, we'll reveal profound biblical principles that explain why so many people work hard, strive, pray, but remain stagnant financially, professionally, and spiritually. We'll talk about almost imperceptible habits, internal attitudes, and behavioral patterns that shape destinies over time. Many of these habits are socially accepted, others even mistaken for virtues, but they all have something in common. They silently distance people from purposeful success. So, stay with me until the end, because each part of this video connects and can transform the way you see your life, your finances, and your purpose. If this type of content resonates with you, like this video now, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any more content. Habit 1. Lack of vision and planning. Without vision, life becomes reactive. Decisions are made only to solve the present, without considering tomorrow. In a financial context, this translates to earning and spending without purpose, starting projects without clarity, accepting any opportunity out of necessity rather than strategy. The person works hard, but doesn't build anything. They move, but don't advance. And over time, they begin to wonder why so much effort doesn't generate consistent results. Biblically, vision is not just an abstract dream. It's the ability to see beyond the present, understanding where you want to go, and organizing the path to get there. When the Bible talks about planning, it's not encouraging absolute control, but responsibility. A lack of planning is often disguised as faith. A person says they trust in God, but avoids setting goals, doesn't organize their finances, doesn't structure their business, and doesn't evaluate their decisions. In practice, they expect God to do what has been entrusted to them as their responsibility. This habit manifests itself clearly in daily life. It's present when someone doesn't know exactly how much they earn or how much they spend. When they always live on the edge, without savings, without a strategy, just surviving month after month. It also emerges in the entrepreneur who has talent but no plan, who starts something with enthusiasm but abandons it at the first obstacle because there was no clear vision of the process. Without vision, any difficulty seems like a sign to give up. Habit 2. Laziness disguised as waiting on God. Waiting on God, according to the Bible, never meant doing nothing. On the contrary, it has always been linked to active obedience, preparation, and action at the right time. However, when this waiting is misunderstood, it becomes an excuse for inaction. The person says they are waiting for an answer, but avoids action. They claim to trust in God, but shy away from effort. They pray for open doors, but don't get up to knock on any. This spiritualized laziness manifests itself in various ways in daily life. It appears when someone repeatedly postpones important decisions, waiting for a sign that never comes. It arises when opportunities are ignored because they require dedication, study, or discipline. It is present when a person complains about their financial situation but doesn't change habits, doesn't seek to learn, doesn't get organized, and doesn't take on greater responsibilities. Everything is left for later, always expecting something external to solve what requires internal action. Biblically, work has always been presented as part of the human purpose, not as punishment but as an expression of responsibility and growth. Laziness, on the other hand, is described as something that leads to scarcity, not only financial, but also emotional and spiritual. When it hides behind beautiful phrases and religious speeches, it becomes even more harmful because the person feels no urgency to change. They believe they are in the right place, when in reality, they are just standing still. In professional life and business, this habit exacts a high price. Projects remain on paper. Ideas are never executed. Talents are wasted. The person may even believe they were born for something greater, but they don't develop enough consistency to sustain that calling. And over time, frustration grows. The feeling arises that God blesses others, but not them, without realizing that the difference lies not in divine favor, but in the daily willingness to act. Habit 3. Poor resource management. Many believe that prospering depends solely on earning more, when in reality, the problem almost always lies in how one manages what one already has. Poor management rarely begins drastically. It gradually takes hold through small, ignored decisions, unplanned expenses, and poorly defined priorities. The person may even receive resources, but they slip through their fingers without bearing fruit. And over time, a constant feeling of scarcity arises, regardless of how much one earns. In everyday life, this habit reveals itself clearly. It's present when someone doesn't control their finances, doesn't know exactly where their money is going, and is constantly putting out fires. It appears when opportunities are wasted due to lack of organization or preparation. It also manifests when time is misused, hours are consumed in distractions while important projects are postponed. All of this creates a cycle where effort exists, but the results don't last. Recognizing the mismanagement of resources is a profound step towards maturity. It means accepting that the problem lies not only in the lack of money or opportunities, but in how what already exists has been managed. This awareness opens the door to real change because it gives people back the power to transform their reality through wiser daily decisions. Habit 4. Excessive fear of making mistakes. Biblically, fear has never been presented as a reliable advisor. It appears as a legitimate human feeling, but dangerous when it begins to govern choices. Excessive fear of making mistakes creates an illusion of protection, when in reality it robs people of experiences, learning, and growth. Those dominated by this habit prefer not to try rather than risk failure. And so, they believe they are avoiding losses, but end up losing exactly what they could build. This fear manifests itself in a very concrete way. It arises when someone avoids undertaking something because they are afraid of failing. When a person doesn't invest in something new because they fear losing money. When someone remains in an unsatisfactory situation for fear of change. Fear causes decisions to be postponed indefinitely, always waiting for the perfect scenario, the ideal moment, the absolute guarantee of success. But that moment never arrives. This habit is also directly connected to poor management. The fear of making mistakes leads to overly conservative choices or a complete lack of decision-making. The person holds back resources, time, and talent not out of strategy, but out of insecurity. Instead of planning wisely, they become paralyzed. Instead of acting with balanced caution, they hide in their comfort zone. And over time, they begin to confuse stagnation with stability. Recognizing the excessive fear of making mistakes is a powerful step because it changes how a person views failures. They cease to be seen as definitive setbacks and begin to be understood as part of the journey. Habit 5. Pride and self-sufficiency. Pride is not just a negative character trait, but an attitude that distances a person from wisdom. Self-sufficiency makes someone believe they have reached the limit of their own development, when in reality, there is still much to learn. This habit prevents corrections, blocks advice, and closes doors that only open to those who recognize that they don't know everything. And silently, it begins to limit results. Pride manifests itself in common and almost invisible ways. It appears when someone rejects feedback, even constructive feedback. When they don't seek guidance because they believe they can solve everything alone. When they insist on strategies that no longer work just to avoid admitting that they need to be revised. In business, this is fatal. Proud entrepreneurs repeat mistakes, ignore market signals, and resist change while believing they are being firm. Self-sufficiency also affects financial life. Proud people rarely ask for help, rarely seek to learn about finances, and often repeat bad patterns for years. They prefer to maintain an image of control rather than admit they need guidance. Over time, this leads to stagnation, recurring debt, or missed opportunities, all without pride being identified as the root cause. Spiritually, this habit is even more profound. Self-sufficiency creates a superficial relationship with God, where faith is only activated in times of crisis. In daily life, the person trusts more in their own strength than in divine guidance. They pray little, listen even less, and decide alone. The Bible shows that true strength lies in conscious dependence, not in absolute independence. When this is lost, the journey becomes heavy and lonely. If this content is making sense to you, stop for a moment and leave your like now. This helps the channel reach more people who also need to hear this message. And if you are not yet subscribed, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next videos where we continue talking about biblical principles applied to real life, finances, business, and purpose. Habit 6. Lack of daily discipline. Lack of discipline doesn't manifest in major failures, but in the constant neglect of small actions. It's the habit of starting and not finishing, of being consistent only when motivated, of acting impulsively instead of consistently. The person may even have good intentions, plans, and faith, but doesn't develop a solid routine to support these desires. Over time, this inconsistency undermines any progress, however promising it may seem at the beginning. This habit appears very clearly. It emerges when someone doesn't maintain financial control for more than a few weeks. When they start a project with enthusiasm but abandon it at the first sign of difficulty. When they set goals but don't create daily habits that make them possible. The absence of discipline transforms dreams into recurring frustrations because nothing lasts long enough to bear fruit. Biblically, discipline is directly linked to wisdom. It is not extreme rigidity, but faithfulness in small things. The Bible teaches that what is done consistently, even on a small scale, produces growth over time. Lack of discipline, on the other hand, generates instability. The person lives in cycles of highs and lows, always starting over, always adjusting, but never advancing continuously. Habit 7. Constant comparison with others. Biblically, comparison has always been a distraction. Each person is called to a specific path, with different times, processes, and responsibilities. When someone starts comparing themselves, they lose the ability to see their own progress. Progress ceases to be perceived because their eyes are fixed on the results of others. And this generates a constant feeling of being behind, even when real growth is happening. In practice, this habit manifests itself in various ways. It appears when someone becomes discouraged with their own work upon seeing the success of another person. When they abandon projects because they seem too small compared to what others are building. When they feel guilty for not being on the same level, even without knowing the behind-the-scenes aspects, the sacrifices, or the processes involved. Comparison creates an invisible pressure that steals peace and weakens consistency. This habit also directly affects financial discipline. People who compare themselves to others tend to spend to maintain appearances, not to build stability. They buy what they don't need, take on commitments they can't sustain, and make decisions based on status, not wisdom. The result is a fragile financial life, built to impress, not to prosper. The Bible teaches contentment and gratitude, but comparison generates permanent dissatisfaction. Habit 8. Lack of patience with processes. Processes have never been treated as delays, but as an essential part of development. Nothing that endures is built instantly. Yet, many become frustrated not because they are on the wrong path, but because they don't accept the necessary time for the journey. Lack of patience creates constant tension between where a person is and where they would like to be, and this tension, when poorly managed, leads to hasty decisions. This habit appears very clearly. It manifests when someone abandons a project because the results took longer than expected. When they give up on learning something new because it requires time and repetition. When they constantly change strategies, jobs, or businesses because they believe there's always a faster way. Impatience causes a person to always be starting over, but never maturing. Financially, impatience with processes is one of the biggest saboteurs of success. Impatient people seek quick gains, take unnecessary risks, and easily fall for unrealistic promises. They don't build reserves, don't respect the time needed for gradual growth, and often lose what took years to achieve because they don't know how to wait. The Bible teaches that haste leads to loss, while constancy generates stability. Habit 9. Neglecting continuous learning. The pursuit of wisdom has never been optional. Learning is a spiritual principle, not just an intellectual one. The Bible values those who listen, observe, instruct themselves, and are willing to adjust their path. When learning is neglected, a person may continue to strive, but with outdated tools for new challenges. And effort without updating leads to burnout, not progress. Neglecting learning comes at a high price. Many face difficulties not due to lack of income, but due to lack of knowledge. They don't understand how to manage expenses, how to invest responsibly, or how to protect what they have achieved. Money passes, but it doesn't remain. The Bible teaches that wisdom preserves while ignorance exposes to risk. Those who don't learn repeat cycles, even while praying for change. The problem isn't a lack of talent, it's a lack of updating. Habit 10. Lack of integrity in small things. Integrity has never been measured solely by big choices, but by faithfulness in the details. Small things reveal who a person truly is when no one is watching. Lack of integrity begins when someone justifies small deviations, small lies, small shortcuts. The problem is that what starts small never stays small. Over time, these deviations accumulate and shape larger decisions. Spiritually, lack of integrity creates an internal division. The person lives one thing on the outside and another on the inside. They pray, but act in contradiction. They talk about principles, but negotiate values when it suits them. This weakens the conscience, diminishes spiritual sensitivity, and creates a void that is difficult to fill. The Bible associates true prosperity with righteousness of heart, not just visible results. Habit 11. Lack of gratitude. Gratitude is not just a reaction to evident blessings, but a continuous attitude of recognition. When gratitude is neglected, a person begins to focus on what is lacking, not on what has already been built. This generates a constant feeling of inadequacy, as if nothing is good enough. Even real achievements lose value because the focus is always on the next goal, never on the path already traveled. In the professional environment and in business, a lack of gratitude generates chronic dissatisfaction. The person never feels recognized enough, never thinks they are in the right place, and constantly changes direction in search of something to fill an internal feeling of emptiness. This harms relationships, weakens teams, and compromises decisions. Those who do not recognize the value of what they already have are unlikely to build anything lasting. This habit is silent because it is socially normalized. The culture encourages constant dissatisfaction, comparison, and an incessant search for more. But the Bible points to a different path: recognize, give thanks, and then move forward. Gratitude does not paralyze, it strengthens. It brings clarity, reduces anxiety, and restores purpose to achievements. Habit 12. Spiritual disconnection. Spiritual disconnection doesn't mean ceasing to believe in God, but ceasing to consciously walk with Him. The person still speaks of faith, still holds Christian values, still prays in difficult times, but no longer seeks daily guidance. Decisions are made solely based on human logic, fear, haste, or external pressure. Over time, faith ceases to be a guide and becomes merely an emergency resource. The connection with God has never been thought of as something occasional. It is relational, constant, and intentional. When this connection weakens, discernment also weakens. The person begins to confuse opportunities with traps, shortcuts with blessings, and apparent success with true prosperity. Without realizing it, they begin to build results that may seem good on the outside, but that do not bring peace, balance, or purpose. Throughout the video, it became clear that success, according to the Bible, is not blocked by a single major mistake, but by silent habits that shape choices every day. Lack of vision, indiscipline, fear, pride, impatience, ingratitude, and spiritual disconnection don't appear all at once. They settle in gradually, almost unnoticed. But the good news is that what was built in silence can also be transformed in the same way. When these habits are recognized, change ceases to be external and becomes internal. Success stops being a tiring race and becomes a construction aligned with purpose, character, and faith. More than prospering, it's about living with clarity, balance, and direction. May this reflection lead you to review your attitudes, adjust your course, and align your decisions with principles that truly endure. If this content resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel to continue growing with wisdom and purpose.